What happens when a man humiliated at 38,000 feet turns out to be the very person who holds the power to bring an airline to its knees? This isn't just a story about a passenger denied dignity. It's about a system exposed, a culture shattered, and the quiet strength of one man who refused to be broken. Adrian Cole boarded his flight expecting nothing more than a long journey in first class. Instead, he was met with doubt, scorn, and repeated humiliation. His right to a seat questioned over and over, his humanity chipped away in front of strangers. But behind his calm eyes and steady silence lay a truth that would turn the world upside down. Adrian was the CEO of a global equity firm, and by the time this flight landed, he would own the very airline that tried to strip him of respect. So, the question is, what happens when power and prejudice collide at 38,000 feet, and how far can one man's resolve echo when the world is watching? Before we begin this journey, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel because you won't want to miss a second of this story. The late afternoon light spilled like liquid gold through the enormous glass walls of North Star Airlines' flagship terminal. It painted long amber streaks across polished marble floors and caught in the suspended dust, turning the air into a stage where every movement seemed rehearsed. The terminal was alive with motion families dragging luggage, executives with their phones pressed to their ears, students lugging backpacks heavy with dreams. And then there was Adrian Cole. He didn't walk like a man rushing for a flight. He moved like someone who already owned the air around him. At 44, Adrian's presence alone carried a quiet authority. His tall frame was wrapped in a custom midnight charcoal suit, the kind tailored to move like skin rather than fabric. A platinum boarding pass glinted between his fingers, the metallic sheen reflecting the light like a blade. The pass wasn't just paper, it was status, proof of loyalty, and access that few could claim. In his other hand, he carried nothing more than a slim leather briefcase, not overloaded, not clumsy. Everything inside was essential. On his wrist rested a watch with a dark leather band and silver face, the only heirloom from his father, a man who once worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. That watch was more than timekeeping. It was a living tether to Adrian's roots, a silent pulse of memory, reminding him of every hardship endured, every barrier broken, every expectation exceeded. He approached the premium check-in counter, where the world was supposed to move smoothly, polished by courtesy and status. The counter attendant, Kelly Harmon, greeted him with a rehearsed smile that never reached her eyes. Her hair was slicked back into a bun so tight it seemed to pull her eyebrows upward. Her badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Boarding pass and ID. "Please," she said. Her tone was flat, procedural. Adrian handed them over, platinum loyalty card resting neatly on top of his passport. Kelly's eyes flicked from his face to the photo, then back again, once, twice. The pause lingered a second too long. Adrian noticed. He always noticed. She scanned the documents, and for the briefest moment her brows lifted when the system registered his elite status. But just as quickly, she tamped it down, replacing surprise with something sharper skeptical aloofness, like the system had betrayed her. Her fingers tapped against the keyboard in a rhythm of deliberate delay. Tap, 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 as if each keystroke was not service, but resistance. The printer spat out a boarding pass with a soft whir. She slid it across the counter without ceremony. "Your boarding pass, sir." No mention of first-class amenities, no smile, No reminder about lounge access, no explanation of pre-boarding privileges. She skipped every ritualistic courtesy that usually came with status. It was a subtle cut, a deliberate omission, a snub. Adrian accepted it in silence. His face betrayed nothing except the faint tightening at the corners of his eyes. He nodded politely and walked away, each step measured, Italian leather shoes whispering against the floor. He didn't need to explode. He cataloged. His life, built on mergers and acquisitions, had trained him to recognize patterns, and this was a pattern. He'd seen it before at gala entrances where he was mistaken for a driver, at boardrooms where his credentials were questioned twice while others were waved through, at luxury stores where security guards followed him down every aisle. Each small indignity was a data point. This was simply the newest entry in his long internal logbook. At security, he entered the priority lane for first-class passengers. The process should have been seamless. His laptop, shoes, and briefcase slid into gray bins. With care, he placed his father's watch on top of his phone, the gesture reverent, almost ceremonial. "Step through, sir," instructed Brent, a TSA officer in his 30s. The scanner hummed. Adrian passed without issue, no alarms. But as he reached for his belongings, Brent's voice cut through. "Sir, step over here for random screening. Random." Adrian had heard that word so many times it had lost meaning. He turned calmly, meeting Brent's gaze. The officer's jaw was set, his eyes scanning Adrian with an intensity reserved for suspects, not customers. Adrian walked to the roped-off area, lifting his arms as the metal wand traced his body. Beep, beep. Each tone was less about security and more about display. A silent accusation for the crowd watching. He caught the sight of 3 white businessmen in wrinkled suits breeze through without pause. Not one was randomly checked. Brent's hands pressed firmly, patting down every seam with clinical detachment. Shoes off, swabs through, briefcase contents scattered like debris. Adrian watched silently as pens, notepads, and documents items he kept in perfect order were left in disarray. "All right, you're clear," Brent said finally. No apology, no explanation, just dismissal. Adrian repacked slowly, methodically, every movement deliberate, laptop back in sleeve, papers aligned, zipper drawn, the watch back on his wrist. Heavier now, a silent promise of what was coming. The sting wasn't new, but today it carried weight. A calculation began forming in his mind, not of anger, but of leverage. As he walked toward the gate, he thought of his father again. The man had taught him to endure with stoicism, to navigate indignity with dignity because survival demanded it. But Adrian was not his father. He had resources, influence, and a sharpened intellect built for strategy. This wasn't just another slight, it was evidence. Evidence of a culture so deeply flawed it practically begged to be restructured. By the time Adrian reached the frosted glass doors of the North Star First Class Lounge, the decision was already taking shape in his mind. The door whispered open, revealing a quiet world of plush leather chairs, dim lights, and curated calm. Behind a mahogany desk sat Susan Whitfield, the hostess. Her practiced smile flickered briefly, but as her eyes scanned Adrian, surprise darkened into suspicion. "Membership card and boarding pass." "Please," she said, her hand extending in a gesture tinged with authority. Adrian handed them over again. Her eyes lingered longer than necessary, darting from the platinum card to his face, her expression wavering between disbelief and discomfort. She asked small-talk questions that weren't really questions. First time flying first class with us? It's quite exclusive. The emphasis on exclusive was deliberate, a reminder, a test. Adrian stood silent, expression neutral. The game was familiar. She wanted him to flinch, to grow irritated, to confirm her bias. But he did what he always did. He observed. He cataloged. He endured. What neither Susan nor Kelly realized was that today, Adrian wasn't just enduring. He was collecting intelligence. This wasn't a flight anymore. This was reconnaissance. And North Star Airlines had just made itself the perfect target. The North Star Airlines first-class lounge was designed to feel like a sanctuary. Its walls muted the chaos of the terminal into a soft hum, like distant surf. Plush chairs were arranged in quiet clusters. A buffet of glossy pastries and polished silver trays of fruit gleamed under warm lighting. A bar stretched across the far wall, bottles aligned like soldiers in parade formation. To any other passenger, it would have been an oasis. But for Adrian Cole, it was a stage. He chose a corner seat, away from the clink of glasses and the murmurs of business travelers trading stories of quarterly earnings. He opened his briefcase, sliding out a tablet. His fingers moved swiftly, reviewing stock performance data, trade indicators, and encrypted updates from his firm. To anyone glancing his way, he was simply a businessman keeping busy. In truth, he was already making mental calculations far beyond personal schedules. Every microaggression, every delayed courtesy, every unnecessary obstacle today was feeding a pattern. The company didn't see him as a valued passenger. They saw him as an intruder. That wasn't just insult. It was a liability. Across the room, a woman with a sleek ponytail adjusted her laptop. Her name was Lena Brooks, a travel vlogger whose modest online following lived for stories of airline experiences, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Her phone, propped discreetly against a water bottle, was streaming live to hundreds of viewers. She hadn't planned for drama, but her audience had just spotted it. They saw the way the lounge hostess had lingered over Adrian's documents. They caught the clipped tone, the word exclusive repeated like a gate slammed shut. Lena's chat filled with comments. Did you see that total profiling? Unbelievable. Man's got platinum status. What else do they want? This better go viral. Adrian didn't notice. He wasn't the type to chase cameras. He was the type who waited, collected, and struck when timing demanded precision. When boarding was called over the intercom, Adrian packed his things with deliberate calm. He rose, smoothing his jacket, and made his way to the gate. The boarding area was already crowded, a loose line forming behind the priority boarding lane. At the front, standing like a sentinel, was Kelly Harmon, the same check-in agent who had scrutinized him earlier. Her expression now was a mask of professionalism, but her eyes betrayed something else, a tightening, a silent challenge. First-class passengers may now board. The announcement rang out. Adrian stepped forward, presenting his boarding pass. Kelly took it. She didn't scan it immediately. Instead, she held it between her fingers like a counterfeit bill. Her eyes ran slowly from the paper to his face, as if she were trying to reconcile an equation that didn't add up. "Sir, this is for first-class boarding only," she said, her voice loud enough to carry. Heads turned. Passengers glanced over, curiosity pricked by the tone. Adrian's face remained perfectly calm. "I'm aware. Seat 2A. Kelly's lips pressed into a line. She scanned the pass once, frowned, then scanned again as though expecting the system to reject it. Finally, she looked up with narrowed eyes. "May I see your ID as well?" The request wasn't unusual in itself, but Adrian noticed the pattern. None of the white men in line before him had been asked. They were waved through with a smile, their passes barely glanced at. He handed over his passport without a word. Kelly flipped through it with exaggerated scrutiny. Her body angled slightly so the surrounding passengers could see. "There seems to be some confusion," she announced, her voice projecting deliberately. "These tickets are quite expensive. Are you sure you're at the right gate?" The hum of the terminal quieted. People stared openly now. A woman near the front pulled out her phone, recording. Lena, still streaming from the lounge entrance, zoomed in. Adrian inhaled slowly through his nose. His tone, when he spoke, was soft but steady. "I've been flying first class with North Star for 7 years. Is there a problem with my ticket?" Kelly hesitated, sensing the tension but unwilling to relent. She called over her supervisor, Mark Delaney, with a sharp wave. "Could you verify this passenger's documentation?" she said, the words dripping with implication. Mark took the boarding pass and ID, glancing at them briefly. He looked at Kelly with an arched brow, the unspoken question clear. "Why are you making this an issue?" But Kelly pressed on, emboldened by the crowd. "We've had issues with boarding pass errors recently," she explained, her voice pitched for maximum audience. "Sometimes economy passengers are given incorrect upgrades. We wouldn't want any embarrassment once aboard." Her words were precise, polished, and poisonous. The crowd shifted uneasily. Adrian caught snippets of whispers. "Wow. She really said that economy passenger he's in a suit. This is getting ugly." Adrian's patience was still intact, though thin. He retrieved his platinum card from his wallet and placed it on top of his passport. The glint of silver lettering was unmistakable. Kelly's face cracked for just a fraction of a second recognition. Perhaps even regret, but she covered it quickly. With a curt nod, she stepped aside. "You may proceed," she said flatly. Adrian collected his documents, his face still neutral. But as he walked toward the jet bridge, he caught the subtle motion of Kelly leaning toward the lead flight attendant. He didn't need to hear the words to know what she was whispering. The message was clear. Watch him. Behind him. Lena ended her stream. The clip was already spreading, reposted with captions: "Black CEO denied boarding, airline under fire." Adrian didn't know it yet, but the world had just been invited into his story. Inside the jet bridge, the air grew warmer, more confined. Each step echoed against metal walls. He could feel the simmer of tension still coiled inside him. He replayed Kelly's words, her calculated volume, the way she had turned his boarding into a public spectacle. Part of him wanted to let the anger rise, to demand an apology, to confront her in front of everyone. But another part, the strategist, held firm. Outbursts burned quickly. Strategy endured. By the time he stepped onto the aircraft, his mask of composure had reset. The first-class cabin was a small world of its own, wide leather seats that converted into beds, polished wood veneer, champagne glasses waiting on trays. Passengers settled in, adjusting ties, scrolling phones, flipping through glossy magazines. The lead flight attendant, Lauren Pierce, approached with forced brightness. Her eyes, however, betrayed suspicion. "Boarding pass." "Please," she said. Adrian's brows rose slightly. Again, he handed it over without a word. She studied it longer than necessary, lips pursed before returning it. Then, without so much as a greeting, she moved down the aisle, offering warm smiles to the passengers on either side of him. Champagne here, pre-flight menus there. Each person received attention, courtesy, a sense of welcome. When she reached Adrian's row, she skipped him entirely. He sat still, his hands resting lightly on the armrest. After a moment, he raised one finger. "Excuse me," he said softly. "I believe you missed my seat." Lauren froze, then forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Economy passengers aren't entitled to pre-flight beverages," she said loudly enough for surrounding rows to hear. The cabin went silent. Heads turned again. Adrian's voice was calm, unshaken. "I am in first class, as you just verified." A flicker of something crossed her face: anger, embarrassment, defiance. "Of course, my mistake," she replied, disappearing briefly before returning with a glass of champagne. She set it down with such force that it sloshed over the rim. Adrian didn't react. He simply lifted the glass, placed it on the tray, and looked out the window. Inside, though, something shifted. For years, he had tolerated these cuts, absorbed them, filed them away, but today felt different. The pattern was undeniable. The culture was rotten, and for the first time, he allowed himself to acknowledge the truth simmering beneath his calm exterior. It wasn't enough to endure, it was time to act. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as boarding finished. Overhead, bins clicked shut one by one, flight attendants moving briskly down the aisle, faces polished into masks of efficiency. Passengers shuffled in their seats, pulling on headphones, tapping at glowing screens. Adrian Cole sat in 2A, the window seat at the front left of the first-class cabin. It was supposed to be a space of comfort, of privilege, of peace before the long flight ahead. Yet every moment so far had built pressure instead of calm. He leaned back, adjusting his tie, eyes fixed on the rain-streaked glass outside. The runway stretched into the horizon like a steel promise, but his mind kept circling the gate confrontation. Kelly's loud insinuation that he didn't belong, the way the words had echoed, amplified by silence and stares. He could still hear her voice. "Are you sure you're at the right gate?" It wasn't the words themselves. It was the intent behind them, the intent to strip away dignity, to plant doubt, to say in front of strangers, "You don't belong here." A soft click interrupted his thoughts. A new flight attendant, Hannah Lee, younger, perhaps mid-20s, approached with a tentative smile. Her demeanor was different from Lauren's sharpness, almost apologetic. "Mr. Cole?" she asked softly. "Yes," Adrian replied. She hesitated, glancing around as though worried her words might be overheard. "Would you mind if I just confirm your seat again?" Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly, though his tone remained calm. "You already have my boarding pass." "I know. I'm sorry. It's just my lead wants to make sure everything is correct." Her voice cracked on the word correct. Adrian pulled the pass from his jacket pocket and handed it over. Hannah's eyes darted across the printout, then to the seat, then back to him. She seemed embarrassed as she handed it back. "Thank you, sir." She turned quickly, retreating down the aisle. Adrian exhaled slowly. A second check, another cut. The pattern was sharpening. Across the aisle, a businessman leaned toward his companion and whispered, not quietly enough, "Why do they keep checking him?" The companion shrugged. Maybe he snuck in. Adrian caught the words. His jaw tightened, though outwardly he remained composed. A voice chimed overhead, the captain welcoming passengers, reciting flight time, weather conditions, and safety procedures. The aircraft began to push back from the gate. Engines hummed to life, vibrating through the cabin floor. Adrian reached into his briefcase and pulled out a leather-bound notebook. He clicked his pen, jotting a line across the page: check-in, security, gate, boarding, cabin, next to each word. He wrote delay, doubt, public spectacle, seat check. He wasn't just recording events, he was documenting evidence. Meanwhile, Lena Brooks, the vlogger, had slipped into her first-class seat several rows behind. She angled her phone discreetly, recording snippets whenever another slight unfolded. Her stream had already gone viral, spreading far beyond her modest follower base. The comments were relentless. Why do they keep harassing him? North Star's done. This is blatant. Who is this guy? Someone find out. Adrian had no idea yet that his story was already a trending topic. Dinner service began. White tablecloths laid across tray tables, menus distributed with smiles. Lauren, the lead flight attendant, moved gracefully down the aisle, her voice soft and charming until she reached Adrian's row. She paused, eyes flicking to his tray. Her hand hovered over the menu but didn't release it. Instead, she looked directly at him. "Mr. Cole, we may have a catering issue," she said, her tone laced with formality. "We'll need to check if we can accommodate your request." Adrian tilted his head. "My request? I haven't ordered yet." Lauren's lips tightened. She placed a single menu on his tray, then immediately turned to the passenger in 2B, a silver-haired investor who received not only a menu but a rehearsed description of the entrees. Adrian looked at the menu in silence. He felt the eyes of nearby passengers on him again. He opened it, scanning the options: roast chicken, filet mignon, vegetarian risotto, standard offerings. Nothing complicated, nothing that would cause a catering issue. When Lauren returned to take orders, she lingered warmly with 2B, then turned to Adrian with clipped efficiency. "What will it be?" "The risotto," Adrian said. Her pen hovered. "I'll see if that's available." She walked away without writing it down. Adrian sat back, his pulse steady, his expression still unreadable, but inside, something was shifting. He thought of his father again, working double shifts, coming home exhausted but never defeated. His father had told him once, "Sometimes the world will treat you like you don't belong in rooms you've already built. That's when you decide whether to stay silent or to claim your place." Adrian had stayed silent many times, collected, endured, moved on, but tonight, on this plane, the silence felt heavier than ever. As the meal service unfolded, Adrian was skipped once again. The cart rolled past, trays distributed, wine poured, silverware clinked. When he raised his hand, Lauren looked down at him with feigned surprise. "Oh, I'm sorry. We ran out of the risotto." Perhaps Chicken Adrian studied her face. He didn't argue. Chicken will do. It arrived 20 minutes later, lukewarm, dropped unceremoniously on his tray. The passenger in 2B glanced sideways, his discomfort visible. "That's not right," he muttered, almost to himself. Adrian gave a small nod but said nothing. In the row behind, Marcus Ellison, the civil rights lawyer, scribbled in his notebook. He had been watching closely, documenting times, words, expressions. He recognized the pattern as clearly as Adrian did. The question burning in his mind was not if this would become a case, it was how soon. As trays were cleared, Adrian closed his notebook and rested his hands on the armrest. The watch on his wrist ticked softly, a metronome for his thoughts. Each second felt heavier, a reminder of time wasted, dignity stolen, patience stretched thin. The cabin dimmed for rest. Passengers reclined, pulling blankets over themselves. The hum of engines deepened, steady and powerful, carrying them higher into the night sky. Adrian stared out the window, city lights below shrinking into constellations of gold. In that quiet, he wrestled with the storm inside. One voice told him to endure, to wait, land, file a complaint, let the system grind slowly. Another voice whispered that this was bigger, that silence allowed rot to fester, that dignity demanded action. His mind turned to his company, to the leverage he commanded in markets that shaped not just airlines but entire industries. He thought of the power tucked inside the leather briefcase beneath his seat. He didn't have to raise his voice to be heard. He could change the conversation entirely. The cabin was dark now, a cocoon of half-sleep and mechanical rhythm. Shades pulled down, reading lights glowing like scattered stars. The steady drone of engines filled the silence, a lullaby for some, but for Adrian Cole, it was a drumbeat, pushing his thoughts forward with relentless force. He sat upright, not reclined, his eyes fixed on the faint reflection in the window. The man staring back at him was composed, precise, outwardly calm. Inside, though, a current raged. He replayed every moment since stepping into the terminal Kelly's sneer. Brent's heavy hands at security, Susan's condescending tone, Lauren's public denial. Each indignity had been small enough to disguise as policy or procedure, but together they formed a chain meant to bind, to reduce, to humiliate. And the truth was clear. It wasn't just personal, it was systemic. His mind flicked to his father again. A memory surfaced late nights at the kitchen table. His father hunched over bills, sweat glistening from a double shift. "The world will test you, son," he had said once, voice rough but steady. "Sometimes it will push you out of rooms you've earned your place in. But you decide whether you walk out quietly or whether you claim the room as your own." Adrian had walked quietly many times, built a fortune, grown an empire, acquired companies larger than the one he'd started with nothing but borrowed office space. He had proved himself 10 times over, but proof wasn't enough. Not here, not now. The soft shuffle of footsteps drew his attention. Hannah Lee, the younger flight attendant, stood near his row. Her posture was hesitant, her eyes troubled. She clutched a tablet against her chest like a shield. "Mr. Cole," she whispered, bending slightly so her words wouldn't carry. I wanted to say I'm sorry. The way this has gone, it's not right." Adrian studied her face. She looked young, idealistic, trapped in the rigid hierarchy of airline service. He saw the conflict etched into her features, duty versus conscience. "Thank you," Adrian said simply. His voice was soft, but there was weight behind it. Hannah hesitated as if wanting to say more, but then Lauren's voice called sharply from the galley. Hannah flinched, murmured a quick, "Excuse me," and hurried away. Adrian leaned back again, watching her retreat. Not everyone was blind. Not everyone was complicit. But the system rewarded silence more than courage. He closed his eyes briefly, drawing in a breath. In that darkness, he allowed himself to feel the weight pressing against his chest. It wasn't just anger, it was exhaustion, the kind that came from decades of fighting battles no one else saw, the kind that wore grooves into a man's soul. When he opened his eyes, the decision crystallized. He would not leave this aircraft as a man simply wronged. He would leave it as a man who shifted the ground beneath those who wronged him. The engine's hum deepened as the plane leveled at cruising altitude. Lauren returned down the aisle, this time with a clipboard in hand. She stopped beside Adrian's seat. Her smile stretched too tight. "Sir, I'll need to verify your seat one more time," she said, her voice loud enough to disturb several drowsy passengers nearby. Adrian's eyes met hers. "You've already verified it. Twice." "I know," she replied smoothly, though her tone carried no apology, just a formality. Her words rang hollow. Everyone nearby knew it. A man across the aisle stirred uncomfortably, whispering to his wife. Adrian handed the pass over again, slowly, deliberately. The gesture wasn't compliance, it was calculation. Lauren scanned it with exaggerated care, then returned it without comment. A passenger behind Adrian muttered under his breath, just loud enough to catch, "This is ridiculous." Lauren shot him a sharp look but said nothing. She retreated to the galley once more. Adrian placed the pass back into his jacket pocket and exhaled. Every humiliation, every unnecessary inspection was another piece of evidence, another line in the case building silently around him. In row 5, Marcus Ellison adjusted his glasses, jotting down the latest exchange in his notebook. He had argued civil rights cases for over a decade, but this was textbook. He knew, without doubt, that if Adrian chose to act, the airline would face a storm. And then there was Lena, still streaming, still narrating softly for her audience, though her voice carried urgency now. "They've checked his seat 3 times," she whispered to her phone. "Everyone else, nothing. You're watching discrimination in real time." Her chat exploded with outrage. "This is insane. Name and shame the airline. Somebody tag CNN." Adrian remained unaware of the digital wildfire spreading around him. His world was narrowed to the pulse of his father's watch, the feel of the leather briefcase at his feet, the weight of restraint pressing against the fire rising in his chest. Dinner trays were cleared, the cabin settling again into uneasy quiet. The lights dimmed further, only the glow of reading lamps breaking the darkness. Adrian opened his notebook once more. This time, instead of listing incidents, he drew a line down the page. On one side he wrote "endure," on the other "act." He sat still, pen hovering, weighing the words. Endure meant silence, patience, perhaps a complaint filed after landing that would be swallowed by bureaucracy. Act meant using everything at his disposal, the power of his company, the leverage of markets, the influence he wielded quietly but decisively. He tapped the pen against the page, steady, rhythmic. The choice had already been made. The pen pressed down on the right side of the line. Act. A calm spread through him then, not unlike the steadying breath before a boardroom announcement or the silent countdown before executing a billion-dollar trade. The fire inside didn't vanish. It cooled, hardened, transformed into focus. He reached down, brushing his fingers against the briefcase. The world thought it was filled with contracts, presentations, perhaps personal effects. But inside was something else, a direct link to his empire, to the infrastructure of his company, to the levers of power that most executives only dreamed of pulling. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to shout for justice. He would rewrite the narrative in silence with precision, in a way that North Star Airlines would never forget. The engines roared softly beneath him, carrying the plane through night skies. Passengers shifted in sleep, unaware that in seat 2A sat a man who had just crossed a threshold inside himself. Adrian turned his gaze to the window once more. Beyond the reflection, the stars burned cold and steady. He lifted his wrist, watching the second hand of his father's watch tick forward. Time moved, always forward, and so would he. The hum of the engines had settled into a steady rhythm, the kind of sound that lulled most passengers into uneasy sleep. But in first class, tension simmered like heat beneath the quiet. Adrian Cole sat upright in seat 2A, his body calm but his mind sharp. He had drawn his line endure on one side, act on the other. His pen had chosen act. The ink felt heavier than any spoken word. Still, before him stretched hours of flight. Hours in which the airline seemed determined to grind him down one indignity at a time. Lauren Pierce, the lead flight attendant, returned from the galley once more. Her posture was perfect, her stride crisp, but her eyes carried that same edge. She leaned slightly toward Adrian's row. "Sir, we'll be collecting meal trays now." Adrian gestured toward his tray, the half-eaten chicken still coolin' on porcelain. "Go ahead." Lauren's lips pressed thin as she whisked it away, but instead of moving on, she paused, clipboard in hand. "I need to confirm your seat number again," she said. It was the fourth time. Adrian handed the pass over silently, his gaze never breaking from hers. She scanned it, nodded once, and handed it back. The action was clinical, but her tone held a trace of satisfaction, as if she had asserted dominance simply by demanding compliance. A man across the aisle finally broke. He leaned forward, his voice clear, cutting through the low cabin hum. "Why do you keep checking him? You've asked more times than anyone else here." Lauren's smile tightened. "Sir, it's standard procedure." The man's wife shook her head. "No, it isn't. We've flown this airline dozens of times. Nobody gets treated like this." Whispers spread through the cabin. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably. Others stared openly. Adrian sat still, letting the moment breathe. He could have spoken, but sometimes silence was the loudest indictment. Behind him, Marcus Ellison scribbled furiously in his notebook, documenting every word. He had been in courtrooms where entire cases turned on less evidence than this. His pulse quickened. He could sense history unfolding. Further back, Lena Brooks angled her phone carefully, whispering to her stream. "You heard that, right? Passengers are questioning it now. This is beyond obvious." The comments rolled in faster than she could read. "Unreal. North Star's finished. That FA is digging her own grave. This is systemic, not an accident." Lena's viewer count surged into the tens of thousands. Someone had already clipped the confrontation at the gate, pairing it with the ongoing harassment. Hashtags multiplied. "You seat 2A, yan flying while black, North Star fail." Adrian had no idea his story was spreading like wildfire through the digital world, but he could feel the shift inside the cabin. Each new slight didn't just humiliate him, it implicated the airline in front of witnesses. The pattern wasn't invisible anymore. It was undeniable. Lauren retreated down the aisle, her expression rigid. Adrian turned his gaze back to the window, the dark night beyond reflecting faintly against the glass. But his thoughts weren't drifting. They were calculating. Inside his briefcase rested the key to leverage that could bring entire corporations to their knees: encrypted access to his company's network, authorization codes that could trigger market shifts. He had used them before in negotiations, timing trades and announcements to force deals into alignment. Tonight, though, wasn't about profit. It was about power, dignity, and justice. His mind began mapping scenarios. What if he signaled Ethan Walker, his COO, to initiate a rapid acquisition? What if they leaked the live stream footage to mainstream media at the same time? What if both corporate and social pressure converged in one strike? The idea steadied him. It wasn't revenge. It was reform by force. The cabin stirred as drinks were served again. This time, Hannah Lee appeared instead of Lauren. Her hands trembled slightly as she set a glass of water on Adrian's tray. She leaned in, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't want to keep checking. I was told to." Adrian's eyes softened for a moment. "I know," he said quietly. "Thank you." Hannah straightened quickly, moving down the aisle, but her words lingered. Confirmation. She hadn't acted out of malice. She had followed orders. The rot ran deeper. It wasn't just one person. It was culture, policy, expectation. Adrian tapped his notebook again, writing 2 words beneath the column marked "Act Systemic Reform." He closed the cover, sliding it back into the briefcase. The watch on his wrist ticked steadily. Time moved forward. So would he. An announcement from the cockpit broke the tension briefly. The captain's voice was calm, reassuring, describing clear skies ahead, an early arrival possible. Passengers murmured approval, some settling further into their reclined seats. But for Adrian, the announcement meant more than weather. It meant he had a window, hours of uninterrupted airspace, enough to coordinate moves invisible to those around him. He adjusted his seat slightly, pulling the briefcase closer to his knees. His fingers brushed the steel latch. With a subtle click, it opened just enough for him to slide his hand inside. The tablet powered on, glowing faintly in the dim cabin. Lines of encrypted code filled the screen, the interface custom-built by his company's security team. He logged in, each keystroke shielded from view by the angle of his seat. He wasn't sending a message yet, not an order, not a strike. He was preparing, aligning, watching data streams cascade across the display, airline stock values, market sentiment trackers, social media trends. The numbers told a story, and it was the same story unfolding in real time within this cabin erosion of trust, collapse of credibility, loss of value. Adrian's lips curved slightly, not a smile, but a recognition. The airline thought it was humiliating one man. In truth, it was unraveling itself. A murmur rose from a few rows back. Lena's voice carried faintly. "It's trending on Twitter now. Over 50,000 views." Adrian didn't turn. He didn't need to. The world was already watching. He closed the tablet softly, sliding it back into the briefcase. Timing mattered. The strike wasn't yet. But soon, very soon. The cabin lights dimmed again for rest. Passengers shifted, adjusting blankets, slipping into uneasy sleep. Adrian remained awake, eyes fixed on the stars outside. His father's watch ticked against his wrist, steady, relentless. This wasn't just about surviving the flight. It was about rewriting the skies themselves. The plane cruised smoothly above the Atlantic, its engines a steady heartbeat against the silence of the night. Most passengers in first class had drifted into slumber, wrapped in blankets, faces softened by the dim cabin glow. Yet, at seat 2A, Adrian Cole was wide awake, his mind sharper than ever. The indignities of the day replayed in his head, but they no longer carried the sting of insult. They had transformed into fuel. Each slight was a data point, each humiliation a piece of evidence, and together they formed a picture. North Star Airlines wasn't simply guilty of poor service, it was guilty of systemic rot. Adrian opened his briefcase again, careful and deliberate. The cabin was quiet. Only the soft shuffle of Hannah Lee moving through the aisle disturbed the stillness. His tablet screen lit up faintly, illuminating his focused expression. He entered a secure code, his fingertips steady, each keystroke unlocking another layer of encrypted access. Within moments, he was inside his company's network. Data poured across the screen stock performance charts, media sentiment dashboards, contract details. He navigated quickly, like a conductor scanning sheet music before a symphony. He paused, then opened a direct line to Ethan Walker, his COO and most trusted ally. Ethan was the kind of man who never slept when Adrian was in the air. A secure message blinked across the tablet status check. Sir Adrian typed back, "Situation evolving. Prepare for Phase 1. No further explanation was needed. Ethan had been briefed months ago on contingency plans for hostile acquisitions, sudden strikes, and corporate warfare, but never before had Adrian considered deploying them in response to something so personal. His finger hovered over the next command. He exhaled, steadying himself, then pressed send. Back on the ground, Ethan would already be alerting their team, monitoring stock feeds, preparing block trades. Adrian could picture him in their headquarters, a minimalist glass tower overlooking the city, eyes flicking between monitors, barking instructions to analysts and traders. Inside the cabin, Adrian remained the picture of composure. To the casual observer, he was just another businessman reviewing emails. But, in reality, he had just shifted the trajectory of an airline. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Cole." He looked up. Hannah Lee stood beside his seat again, her hands clasped nervously. She glanced around to make sure Lauren wasn't near before leaning closer. "I wanted to apologize again," she whispered. "What's happening, it's not normal. I know you've been treated unfairly." Adrian studied her carefully. She seemed sincere, her eyes filled with the kind of unease that comes from being ordered to do something against one's conscience. "It's not you," Adrian said quietly. "It's the system you're forced to follow." She nodded, biting her lip. I don't want you to think everyone here feels the same. Some of us see it. We just can't." Her voice trailed off. Adrian gave her a small, reassuring nod. "You've done enough by saying this." Hannah hesitated, then slipped a folded piece of paper onto his tray before moving quickly down the aisle. Adrian unfolded it discreetly. A simple note, scrawled in hurried handwriting. "They told us to keep checking you. Orders from the lead." Adrian folded the note carefully, sliding it into his notebook. Evidence, more confirmation of what he already knew. Behind him, Marcus Ellison had noticed the exchange. He leaned slightly forward, whispering, "She gave you something." Adrian turned his head just enough to respond. "Proof." Marcus's eyes gleamed. "Then, this isn't just harassment, it's policy." Adrian said nothing more. He didn't need to. Marcus's pen was already scratching furiously across his notebook. Further back, Lena Brooks was still streaming, her voice hushed but intense. "Something's happening up front. I can't see everything, but trust me, this is going to explode when we land." Her viewership had swelled into the hundreds of thousands. Hashtags were trending. News outlets were beginning to pick it up. What had started as a small live stream was now a viral storm waiting to breach the walls of mainstream media. Adrian returned to his tablet. He watched in real time as North Star's stock tickers began to flicker, subtle fluctuations that hinted at nervous investors. Ethan was already moving. Adrian could almost hear his COO's voice. If they think they can humiliate Adrian Cole without consequence, they're about to learn the cost. Another message pinged across the secure channel, Phase 1 executed. "Standing by for your next command." Adrian typed slowly, each word deliberate. "Prepare Phase 2. Hold until signal." He closed the tablet, resting his hands on the armrest. His father's watch ticked against his wrist, the steady rhythm grounding him. The choice was no longer whether to act. The choice was when. Timing mattered more than rage. The strike would come, but it had to come when the world was watching. A shadow fell across him. Lauren Pierce had returned, her smile tight as ever. She held a list in her hand. "Sir, I need to confirm your seat one more time." Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Passengers nearby stirred, their irritation clear. One man muttered, "This is harassment." Another whispered to his wife, "I've never seen anything like this." Adrian handed the boarding pass over yet again, his movements unhurried. Lauren checked it, scribbled something on her clipboard, and handed it back. "Thank you," she said curtly, before moving on. Adrian slipped the pass back into his pocket, his face composed. Inside, though, the decision was clear. The next time she returned, he would not just comply, he would act. The engines roared softly beneath them, carrying the plane through the night sky. Around him, passengers dozed, unaware that a corporate storm was already brewing below. Adrian turned once more to the window, the stars beyond cold and steady. He whispered softly, words only he could hear. No more silence. The watch on his wrist ticked on. Time was approaching. The moment was near. The cabin remained dim, a hush falling over most of the passengers as the aircraft pressed on through the night. The soft chime of the seatbelt sign being switched off broke the silence, followed by the shuffle of a few passengers stretching their legs. In seat 2A, Adrian Cole sat upright, eyes steady on the reflection in the window. The faint outline of his face against the glass looked calm, almost detached. But inside him, the storm was gathering. Every humiliation, every insult catalogued in silence, had built to this moment. He shifted his gaze across the aisle. The businessman and his wife who had spoken up earlier were now whispering again, their expressions troubled. Adrian caught a word here and there unbelievable, targeted, shameful. They weren't wrong. The quiet was broken when Lauren Pierce, the lead flight attendant, returned with a clipboard in her hand and a stiff smile that had long since lost its charm. She stopped at Adrian's seat yet again, tilting her head slightly. "Sir, I'll need to verify your seat assignment one more time," she announced, her voice pitched to Carrie. A ripple of disbelief spread through the cabin. Someone groaned audibly. A man in row 3 muttered, "This is harassment." Plain and simple. Adrian handed the boarding pass over with slow precision. His eyes locked with Lauren's. There was no anger in his expression, no raised voice, only a deep, steady gaze that unsettled her far more than any outburst could. She checked the pass, scribbled something on her clipboard, and returned it. But this time, instead of moving on, she leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice just enough for him to hear. "You should be grateful you're up here at all," she said. The words landed like a blade. Adrian felt the breath leave his chest, not in shock, but in confirmation. The mask had slipped. No more pretending this was policy or mistake. It was prejudice, plain and deliberate. He inhaled slowly, the watch on his wrist ticking against his pulse. His father's voice echoed faintly in his memory. "You decide whether to walk out quietly or claim the room as your own." The businessman across the aisle shot upright, his voice loud now. "Enough. This is disgraceful. You've checked him 5 times, and now you insult him." "What is going on here?" Lauren's face froze, her professional mask cracking under the weight of the outburst. Other passengers stirred, murmurs rising into audible protests. A woman in row 4 pulled out her phone, starting to record. Behind Adrian, Marcus Ellison spoke clearly, his voice calm but resonant. "As a civil rights attorney, I can assure you this will not end quietly. Every action tonight has been documented." Lauren's lips trembled as she tried to regain control. "Sir, please, there's no need to escalate," but the escalation had already arrived. From further back, Lena Brooks spoke directly to her stream. "You're seeing it live. They just told him he should be grateful to be in first class." This is going viral no way. North Star survives this without accountability. Her viewership had surged past 1 million. Comment feeds screamed across the screen. Holy hell. Did she really say that boycott North Star, expose her, expose them all? Adrian remained silent through it all, his composure unbroken. But inside, the decision had solidified into steel. This was no longer about a single flight or a single insult. This was about a company that had revealed its core rot in public view. He reached down, sliding his hand into the briefcase. The tablet came alive again, glowing faintly in the dim light. He tapped out a short command on the secure line to Ethan Walker. Phase 2, execute at market open, back at headquarters. Ethan would already be coordinating with their network of traders and legal teams. Adrian could picture the controlled chaos unfolding, block trades arranged quietly. Rival firms brought into alignment, contracts shifting like tectonic plates. By the time this aircraft touched down, North Star's stock would be under siege. Adrian closed the tablet, resting it on his lap. Lauren, flustered by the passengers' protests, retreated to the galley, but the damage was done. Whispers filled the cabin, now whispers of outrage, disbelief, and solidarity. A few passengers nodded at Adrian as if to silently convey support. Hannah Lee appeared again, moving carefully down the aisle with a tray of water glasses. She stopped by Adrian's seat, her hands shaken slightly. She leaned in just enough to whisper. I heard what she said. I'm so sorry. Adrian looked up at her, his voice steady. You don't need to apologize for her. Tears glimmered briefly in Hannah's eyes before she straightened and moved on. Adrian turned back to the window, the stars cold and indifferent against the black sky. Yet, in their silence, he saw clarity. He had tried patience. He had tried silence. But silence had only invited more contempt. It was time to claim the room. He adjusted his tie, settled back in his seat, and waited. The watch ticked on, each second bringing him closer to the moment the world would learn what had unfolded at 38,000 feet. Behind him, Marcus closed his notebook with a soft snap. He leaned forward just enough for Adrian to hear. "When you act," he said quietly, "you won't be alone." Adrian gave the faintest nod. He didn't need allies, but it mattered to know they were there. Witnesses. Voices ready to amplify the truth. The engines roared steadily beneath them, carrying the plane through the night. Unseen to the sleeping world below, a battle line had been drawn, and Adrian Cole was no longer a passenger. He was a man preparing to bring an empire to its knees. The steady hum of the engines filled the first-class cabin, a low drone that masked the tension coursing through the air. Passengers shifted uneasily in their seats, some whispering to each other, others openly glancing at Adrian Cole as if to reassure themselves that they were not imagining what they had just witnessed. The words still hung like smoke in the air. "You should be grateful you're up here at all." Adrian sat motionless, his posture straight, his face calm, but beneath the surface, a storm of thoughts sharpened with every tick of the watch on his wrist. This wasn't just humiliation anymore. It was evidence. It was leverage. And leverage was the currency he knew how to spend best. From the galley. Lauren Pierce tried to regain her composure. Her hands trembled as she poured champagne into flutes for a pair of older passengers. She forced a smile, but her jaw ached from the tension. She knew her words had been overheard. Worse, she'd seen the phones raised, the glowing red lights of recording in progress. She'd crossed a line, and now the fallout loomed. Her junior, Hannah Lee, lingered nearby, stealing nervous glances at Adrian. She'd grown up idolizing flight attendants, the uniform, the poise, the service. But tonight, she saw the ugly undercurrent of bias exposed, raw and undeniable. It shook her. Her loyalty to her team clashed violently with the gnawing truth that what Adrian endured was wrong. Profoundly wrong. In the cockpit, the captain, Edward Harrington, reviewed a printed note slid under the door from corporate dispatch. The message was terse. Urgent. Identify if any senior executives from Mercer Equity Group are on board. Report immediately. Harrington frowned, tapping the paper with his index finger. He was a man in his late 50s, his hair silver at the temples, his eyes sharp from decades of command. He had flown through storms that bent steel, navigated crises at 39,000 feet, and brought every soul home safely. But this message unsettled him. Mercer Equity Group. The name carried weight. He had read about them in the business press takeovers, restructurings, swift and decisive. They were sharks in a sea of corporate whales. Why would headquarters be frantic about whether Mercer's people were on this flight? He leaned back in his seat, eyes on the horizon glowing faintly with the first hint of dawn. Something was happening beyond the cockpit walls, and his instincts told him it was tied to the tension simmering in his premium cabin. He keyed the interphone. Lauren, report to the cockpit. A pause, then her voice, brittle, through the line. Yes, Captain. Moments later, she entered, adjusting her scarf and smoothing her hair with a trembling hand. Harrington studied her in silence for a moment. He could tell something had rattled her. "Lauren," he said evenly, "what's going on in my cabin?" She stiffened. "It's nothing. Captain, just a difficult passenger. We've had to verify his documents a few times. He seems out of place." Harrington's brow furrowed. Out of place. He has a first-class ticket. Yes. But she hesitated. "I don't think he belongs there. She stopped herself, realizing how her words sounded. The captain's voice hardened. "He's what, Lauren?" not the kind of man you expected in seat 2A, her lips pressed into a thin line. I was just ensuring protocol. Captain. Harrington leaned forward, his gaze piercing. Protocol doesn't involve humiliating paying passengers. And corporate just asked me if anyone from Mercer Equity Group is on board. Do you understand what that means? Lauren blinked, confused. Mercer Equity. Why would? Because. Harrington cut in. If that man you've been harassing is connected to them, you may have just made the biggest mistake of your career. Lauren's throat went dry. She opened her mouth but found no words. Return to the cabin, Harrington ordered. And for God's sake, treat every passenger with respect. That's not a request, it's an order. She turned and left, her steps unsteady. Back in his seat, Adrian had not moved. His tablet rested on his lap, the secure line still glowing faintly. Ethan Walker's latest message pulsed on the screen. Block purchases complete. Holden at 27%. Defensive responses anticipated by morning. Adrian's fingers hovered over the keys, then typed accelerate to 35%. Deploy media strategy. Time to tighten the vise. He hit send, then closed the device with a soft click across the aisle. Marcus Ellison, the attorney, leaned toward him. They're panicking up front, he murmured. I can feel it, and I think you've rattled more than just the staff. Adrian gave a faint nod. His eyes never left the window. Good. Let them squirm. At that moment, the intercom chimed. The captain's voice filled the cabin, calm yet edged with something unfamiliar. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Harrington. We ask for your patience as we coordinate with corporate regarding an urgent matter. Please remain seated. We'll provide updates as we receive them. The passengers exchanged uneasy glances. What kind of airline made mid-flight announcements about corporate directives? Something bigger was clearly unfolding. Lauren reappeared, her face pale. She moved through the cabin, her smile forced, her hands clutching a tray of refreshments she had no intention of distributing. She stopped at Adrian's seat, bending low. Sir, she whispered, the captain wants to know, are you with Mercer Equity Group? The question, delivered in such a trembling voice, was almost surreal. Adrian regarded her for a long moment. Then, with deliberate calm, he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a sleek black business card. He held it between two fingers, the silver lettering catching the dim cabin light. Adrian Cole, Chief Executive Officer, Mercer Equity Group. Lauren's hand trembled as she accepted it. Her eyes darted over the text, recognition dawning like a blow to the chest. Her face drained of all color. She nearly stumbled backward as she retreated toward the galley. The businessman across the aisle let out a low whistle. Well, now, he muttered, shaking his head, this flat just turned into history in the making. Marcus smiled faintly, leaning back in his seat. They just learned the hard way who they've been disrespecting. Adrian said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence now carried the weight of inevitability. In the cockpit, Captain Harrington received the news from Lauren, her words faltering, her face stricken. It's him, she whispered, the CEO of Mercer Equity. The captain's grip tightened on the yoke, his pulse quickening. He closed his eyes briefly, then exhaled. The storm he had felt approaching was here. Then this airline, he said quietly, is in far deeper trouble than they realize. In the cabin. Adrian leaned back in his seat, his mind sharp, his resolve unshakable. He had given them every chance to treat him with basic dignity. They had chosen arrogance instead. Now, they would reap the consequences. The engines droned on. The sky lightened with dawn, and North Star Airlines edged closer to a reckoning born not of anger, but of a man's quiet, unbreakable resolve. The dawn light seeped into the cabin, pale gold against the drawn shades, but there was nothing peaceful about the air inside first class. Every passenger could feel the shift. Something had broken open, something bigger than a petty squabble between traveler and crew. Adrian Cole sat motionless in seat 2A, the black business card now out of his hand and back into his jacket. He didn't need to explain anything further. The revelation had traveled through the cabin like electricity, whispered seat to seat until everyone knew who he was. The man they had seen humiliated, doubted, and dismissed was not just another passenger. He was the chief executive of Mercer Equity Group. And Mercer Equity Group was not an ordinary company. It was an empire across the aisle. Marcus Ellison scribbled the words "revealed," and witnesses gasped in his notebook, underlining them twice. He didn't need to embellish later. The story was writing itself in real time. Lauren Pierce stood frozen near the galley curtain, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Her hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped the clipboard she clutched. She wanted to retreat, to hide, but there was nowhere to go. She had built this storm with her own words. Hannah Lee hovered nearby, torn between duty and conscience. She longed to walk up to Adrian and apologize openly. But the fear of reprisal from her lead still gripped her like cold steel. In the cockpit, Captain Harrington rubbed his temples, staring at the note from corporate again. They had wanted him to identify if Mercer Equity was on board. Now he knew, and he also knew that the airline's fate was no longer in his hands. It was in the hands of the man sitting silently in seat 2A. Adrian opened his briefcase again. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. The tablet glowed against the dim cabin light. Secure messages blinked rapidly. Market response strong. North Star stock down 7% pre-market. Rival carriers climbing. Phase 2 deployed. Options positions established. Social media traction accelerating. Adrian scrolled calmly, his face betraying nothing. He typed a short reply, "Initiate, Phase 3, prepare media release under controlled timing." When he closed the tablet, the silence around him felt heavier. Every glance, every whisper carried the same unspoken thought. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. This was about the airline itself. The businessman across the aisle cleared his throat, his voice steady but respectful. "Mr. Cole," he said quietly, "whatever happens next, you have witnesses. Every one of us saw how you were treated." Adrian inclined his head slightly. "I know, and I thank you." The words were simple, but his tone carried the gravity of a promise. At the back of the first-class cabin, Lena Brooks kept her phone angled discreetly, whispering to her stream. "You guys, I can't believe this. He's not just a passenger. He's Adrian Cole. This whole thing, it's about to blow wide open. Look at the comments. CNN, Bloomberg, they're tagging this already. It's everywhere." Her viewership ticker surged past 2 million. Clips of Lauren's insult had gone viral. Paired with Adrian's quiet dignity and the murmurs of outrage from fellow passengers, Lauren finally forced herself down the aisle, stopping at Adrian's seat. Her voice shook as she spoke. "Mr. Cole, on behalf of North Star Airlines. I'd like to apologize. Adrian raised a hand, silencing her mid-sentence. His voice was calm, low, but it cut through the cabin with the clarity of command. I don't accept personal apologies, Ms. Pierce. This isn't about you alone. This is about the culture that trained you to believe I didn't belong here. A system that rewards humiliation over respect. Keep your apology. You'll need it when your supervisors ask you to explain your choices. The air around them crackled. Passengers leaned in, holding their breath. Marcus underlined furiously in his notes. Lauren flushed crimson. She tried to muster a rebuttal, but the words caught in her throat. She retreated quickly, vanishing behind the galley curtain. Adrian leaned back, exhaling slowly. His pulse was steady, his decision clear. He would not wait for the airline to act. He would act first. The intercom chimed. Captain Harrington's voice, tense yet controlled, filled the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be commencing our breakfast service shortly. We appreciate your cooperation during this unusual situation. Rest assured, we are working with headquarters to ensure a smooth continuation of your flight. His tone was professional, but beneath it lay an undercurrent of unease. He had seen plenty in his career, but never had he been forced to manage the fallout of corporate scandal while flying at cruising altitude. Adrian closed his eyes briefly, listening to the drone of the engines. He imagined the frantic calls at North Star's headquarters, PR scrambling, legal scrambling, executives panicking, and he imagined Ethan Walker, calm and unflappable, guiding Mercer's team like chess masters shifting pieces on a board. He opened his eyes, the fire inside him cool and steady now. There was no turning back. Hannah approached once more, a tray in her hands. Her voice was soft, almost pleading. "Mr. Cole, can I offer you breakfast? We have an omelet or French toast." Adrian looked at her, his gaze softening. She was young, trapped in a machine she hadn't built. "French toast, please," he said gently. Relief flickered across her face as she placed the tray down carefully, ensuring nothing spilled. "Thank you, sir." As she moved on, Adrian picked up the fork, cutting into the food with deliberate calm. Every movement was controlled, as though to remind himself that dignity wasn't a gift to be granted. It was a right to be claimed. Behind him, Marcus whispered, "When this lands, they won't know what hit them." Adrian didn't reply. He didn't need to. The sun crept higher outside, flooding the cabin with light. The shadows that had cloaked the night's humiliations faded, replaced by clarity. Adrian took a sip of coffee, the warmth steadying him further. He had endured enough. He had cataloged enough. Now he was ready to strike. The plane cut smoothly through the morning sky, its fuselage shimmering in sunlight. But inside the first-class cabin, the atmosphere was thick, charged like a storm cloud ready to break. Every passenger could feel it, the shift from petty inconveniences to something monumental. Adrian Cole sat in 2A, his shoulders squared, his hands resting lightly on the closed tablet in his lap. His expression was unreadable, but his presence carried weight now. The whispers, the murmurs, the growing awareness of who he was had transformed the balance of power in the cabin. No longer the man under scrutiny. He was the man everyone else watched with reverence, with curiosity, with unease. From the galley. Lauren Pierce hesitated before stepping out. Her palms were damp, her throat tight, the realization of what she had done pressed against her ribs like a vice. She had spoken words she could never take back, words that were now spreading across social media like wildfire. Paired with her face, her uniform, her airline, she smoothed her hair, tried to steel herself, then moved down the aisle as if nothing had changed, but everything had. Hannah Lee trailed behind her, clutching a tray of coffee pots. She cast Adrian a quick, sympathetic glance before lowering her eyes. The kindness she'd tried to show him earlier felt woefully small compared to the ugliness her lead had unleashed. The intercom chimed. Captain Edward Harrington's voice filled the cabin, steady but edged with tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you again for your patience. We've been in contact with headquarters, and I assure you that your safety and comfort remain our top priority." He paused. "We also want to remind all passengers to treat one another and our crew with respect." It was a generic message, the kind captains issued to calm turbulence of a different sort. But the passengers weren't fooled. They exchanged knowing looks. Respect was not the issue. Respect had already been shattered. Adrian lifted his glass of water, taking a slow sip, then set it down with deliberate care. He had endured enough. The silence, the restraint it had carried him this far, but restraint alone did not shift empires. At some point, truth had to be spoken aloud. Lauren approached his row, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Mr. Cole," she said, voice low but audible to those nearby, again, on behalf of North Star Airlines. "I'd like to personally apologize for any misunderstanding earlier." Adrian looked at her evenly. His voice was calm, each word measured, but it carried across the cabin with the weight of authority. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a choice. Every time you asked for my boarding pass, every time you denied me what you gave freely to others, every time you looked at me and decided I did not belong, it was a choice. And choices have consequences. A hush fell over the cabin. Passengers leaned in, riveted. Phones were raised again. Lauren's lips parted, her face blanching. She wanted to protest, to explain, but Adrian wasn't finished. "I am not a man who raises his voice. I am not a man who seeks attention. But I am a man who will not allow dignity to be stripped away without answer. You thought you were humiliating me. In truth, you were exposing your company." The businessman across the aisle muttered, "My God." Marcus Ellison, the civil rights attorney, nodded firmly. "That's on record now," he said softly, his pen scratching across the page. Lauren's hands shook. She took a step back, retreating toward the galley, unable to withstand his gaze. Adrian turned slightly in his seat, his voice carrying to the cabin at large. "Every person here has witnessed what's unfolded. You know what you saw, you know what you heard, and you know it cannot be excused away as error or procedure." There was a murmur of assent, passengers nodding, some even voicing support. "Absolutely. He's right. We all saw it. Behind him." Lena Brooks whispered to her phone camera, "He's speaking now. He's not just a passenger, he's turning this into history." Her viewership counter ticked past 3 million. The chat exploded. Adrian reached into his jacket and drew out his business card again. He placed it carefully on the tray table in front of him, then rested his fingertips lightly on its silver lettering. "For anyone still unsure," he said, "I am Adrian Cole, CEO of Mercer Equity Group, and as of this morning, Mercer controls 35% of North Star Airlines." Gasps rippled through the cabin. A woman in row 4 clapped a hand over her mouth. Phones recorded furiously. Lauren's voice cracked as she whispered, 35%. Adrian nodded once. By the time we land, it may be more. The revelation hit like turbulence, shaking not the aircraft but the people within it. In the cockpit, Harrington received confirmation from Dispatch Mercer Equity filings, headlines flashing across financial news. He leaned back in his seat, eyes wide. In the cabin, Adrian's calm presence was no longer just quiet dignity, it was undeniable authority. The airline had not only humiliated a man, it had humiliated its new owner. He leaned back, folding his hands loosely in his lap. This flight will end, but its story will not. North Star Airlines will answer for this, and I will make certain the answers are written into policy, into practice, into every decision this company makes going forward. The businessman across the aisle broke into a low chuckle of disbelief. "Well, Ms. Pierce," he said, his tone dry, "you just picked the wrong man to mess with." Lauren disappeared behind the curtain, pale and shaking. Hannah remained, her eyes wide, a mixture of awe and fear as she looked at Adrian. Adrian glanced at her gently. "You have nothing to fear. Miss Lee, you did what you could. The future belongs to those willing to choose better." Her throat tightened, and she gave the faintest nod before hurrying away. Adrian rested back against his seat, the faint smile of a man who had waited patiently for his moment. The watch on his wrist ticked on, each second a drumbeat of inevitability. At 38,000 feet, the power dynamic had shifted forever. Adrian Cole was no longer the passenger being scrutinized. He was the man holding the airline's fate in his hands, and everyone on board knew it. The aircraft descended slowly through layers of cloud, its wings cutting through pale morning light. The seatbelt sign flicked on with a chime, and the cabin shifted as passengers adjusted trays, folded blankets, and prepared for arrival. But the first-class cabin was not filled with the usual quiet anticipation of landing. It buzzed with something heavier, sharper. Every person knew they had just witnessed history in motion. Adrian Cole sat in 2A, upright, calm, his briefcase neatly closed and locked at his feet. The tablet inside still hummed with the afterglow of commands that had already changed the airline's fate. 35% control. By now, perhaps even more. His company's traders were relentless, and once they set their sights on a target, there was no pause until dominance was achieved. He folded his hands loosely over his lap, outwardly serene, inwardly calculating. Across the aisle, the businessman who had spoken earlier whispered to his wife, "They'll never recover from this, not after what we've seen." She nodded, her phone already buzzing with push notifications from news outlets. Adrian's name was everywhere. Behind them, Marcus Ellison closed his notebook with a soft thud. His notes were meticulous, a minute-by-minute record of every slight, every insult, every witness response. His lawyer's mind was already drafting legal frameworks, civil rights suits, regulatory complaints, shareholder actions. This was bigger than one man's dignity. This was about structural change. At the rear of first class, Lena Brooks whispered into her phone one last time before the final approach. "We're about to land. But let me tell you, this story doesn't end when the wheels touch the ground. It's only just beginning." Her viewer counter passed 5 million before she finally ended the stream. In the galley. Lauren Pierce pressed trembling hands against the counter. She had spent the last 30 minutes in silence, her colleagues casting sidelong glances at her but offering no comfort. She knew her career was finished. The uniform she had once worn with pride now felt like chains tightening around her. Every word she had spoken to Adrian replayed in her mind, a chorus of errors that would define her forever. Hannah Lee stood nearby, her young face pale. She wanted to believe that she had done the right thing in showing Adrian quiet kindness, but guilt still gnawed at her. She had not stood up loudly. She had not stopped her lead. That knowledge would stay with her long after this flight. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are on final approach. Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened. On behalf of North Star Airlines, we thank you for choosing us." His tone was steady, but beneath it lay the weight of a man who understood the storm waiting on the ground. The aircraft touched down with a gentle thud, tires screeching softly against the runway. A murmur ran through the cabin as the engines roared in reverse thrust. Adrian kept his gaze fixed forward, the watch on his wrist ticking calmly. Every second brought him closer to the reckoning. As the plane taxied toward the gate, passengers craned their necks, pressing to see through the shades. Outside, flashing lights reflected against the fuselage. A crowd waited at the terminal windows press. Airport staff. Executives summoned in haste. Word had traveled faster than the aircraft itself. The seatbelt sign pinged off. Passengers reached for bags, but the mood was different now. They weren't just disembarking. They were witnesses walking off the set of a story already spiraling across global headlines. Lauren lingered at the front of the cabin, her face pale, her lips trembling. She opened her mouth as Adrian stood, but he raised a hand. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. "Don't," he said. "You've said enough." She closed her mouth, tears threatening to spill, and stepped aside. Hannah stood frozen beside her, eyes downcast. Adrian paused just long enough to meet her gaze. "You'll be fine," he told her softly. "Learn from this. Choose better next time." Her throat tightened, and she nodded. Adrian stepped into the aisle. Passengers around him murmured softly, some nodding in respect, others pulling out phones to capture the moment. Marcus fell in step just behind him, notebook tucked under his arm. The door opened with a hiss, and the jet bridge extended like an umbilical cord to the waiting terminal. Adrian walked calmly into the bright lights. Cameras flashed instantly. Reporters called out his name, their voices overlapping in a frenzy of questions. "Mr. Cole, is it true Mercer Equity now controls a third of North Star? Do you plan to remove the current executive leadership? Will you be suing the airline for discrimination?" Adrian did not stop. His stride was even, unhurried, but every step carried gravity. The crowd parted instinctively, leaving a clear path toward the cluster of executives waiting near the gate podium. At their center stood Richard Halverson, North Star's CEO. His suit was immaculate, but his face was pale, his smile forced. He extended a hand as Adrian approached. "Mr. Cole," Halverson began, his voice smooth but tight. "We deeply regret any Adrian did not take the hand." He stopped just short, his gaze steady, his voice calm but edged with iron. "This isn't about regret, Mr. Halverson. This is about accountability. On this flight, your airline revealed itself, the world saw it, and now Mercer will ensure that change is not optional, it is mandatory." The cameras erupted in flashes, gasps rippled through the terminal. Halverson's hand faltered, dropping to his side. Adrian continued, his voice resonant. "Your staff humiliated me not because of error, but because of who I am. And yet who I am is the man who now holds controlling interest in your company. That is the irony of today. You tried to remind me of my place. Instead, I will redefine yours. Reporters scrambled to capture every word. Lena, standing just behind the throng, whispered into her phone. You're hearing it live. This isn't just a passenger complaint. This is the birth of a takeover. Halverson swallowed, his facade cracking. Mr. Cole, surely we can discuss. There will be discussions. Adrian cut in smoothly, but not here. Not in whispers. The world will hear them. The reforms, the policies, the accountability, every measure will be public, and it will begin now. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the clicking of camera shutters. Passengers behind Adrian spilled into the terminal, their faces alight with awe. They had boarded a plane expecting anonymity, but they had landed as witnesses to a corporate reckoning. Adrian turned slightly, his gaze sweeping the cameras. Dignity is not negotiable, respect is not optional. North Star Airlines will never forget that again. Then, with calm finality, he walked forward. The crowd parted again, leaving his path clear, every eye following him. Behind him, Lauren sank into a seat at the gate podium, her face buried in her hands. Hannah stood frozen beside her, trembling, and Halverson remained rooted to the floor, the reality of his crumbling empire crashing down around him. The watch on Adrian's wrist ticked steadily, each second a reminder that time was no longer on North Star's side. They had humiliated the wrong man, and now the world belonged to him. The terminal pulsed with chaos. Cameras flashed in quick bursts, microphones thrust forward like weapons, reporters shouting over one another for a statement. Passengers spilled out of the jet bridge, their faces a mixture of awe and disbelief. They knew they had been part of something historic, though the scale of it was only just beginning to register. At the center of it all, Adrian Cole stood calm, still as stone, his presence commanding in a sea of noise. His silence drew more attention than shouting ever could. It forced the crowd to lean in, to wait, to listen. Across from him, Richard Halverson, North Star's CEO, tried to maintain composure. His practiced smile had cracked, his words faltering under the weight of cameras and the man before him. Behind him hovered a small group of executives, their suits immaculate, but their eyes darting nervously. They knew this was no ordinary passenger complaint. This was existential. Mr. Cole, Halverson began again, desperation edging his tone. We can resolve this privately. Let's step into the lounge, and Adrian raised a hand, silencing him. His voice was low, deliberate, but it carried with the clarity of a command. No more whispers, no more cover-ups. This ends in the open. The terminal went quiet. Even the reporters hushed, sensing gravity in his words. Adrian continued, his tone steady, each sentence precise. On this flight, I was humiliated repeatedly, not because of an error, not because of a system glitch, but because of prejudice, because your staff looked at me and decided I did not belong where I had paid to sit. They doubted, they mocked, they demeaned, and the world saw it. Gasps rippled through the watching crowd, phones streamed live, comments exploding across social media. And yet, Adrian said, his eyes fixed on Halverson, the irony is, this the man you chose to strip of dignity is the man who now owns your company. Mercer Equity Group crossed 35% ownership this morning. By the end of the week, we will hold control and interest. You do not get to decide what happens next. I do." Halverson's jaw tightened. "Surely, Mr. Cole, we can discuss terms." Adrian stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "Here are the terms. First, every employee involved in tonight's incident is suspended, effective immediately, pending investigation. Their supervisors will join them. Second, North Star Airlines will issue a public apology, not buried in fine print, but on the front page of every major outlet. Third, a fund of $50 million will be established in my name, the Cole Foundation for Equity in Aviation, to address systemic discrimination across the industry. And fourth, new training and policy reforms will begin now, not tomorrow, now." The terminal erupted in noise. Reporters shouted. Passengers gasped. Executives whispered frantically. Halverson's face blanched. "That's Mr. Cole. These are drastic measures. They'll devastate our public image." Adrian's voice hardened. "Your image is already devastated. What I'm offering is survival." The businessman from the flight, now standing just beyond the cameras, called out, "He's right. We all saw it. He's not exaggerating. It was disgraceful." Other passengers echoed him. "It happened. We saw it. He's telling the truth." Adrian's eyes swept the terminal. "The people here are witnesses. The millions watching online are witnesses. The only question is whether North Star will acknowledge the truth or try to bury it and collapse under the weight of its own denial." Halverson faltered. He knew Adrian was right. Resistance would not just fail, it would accelerate the company's implosion. He lowered his eyes briefly, then raised them again, voice subdued. "We accept your terms." Adrian gave the faintest nod. "Good, then let the world hear it. Not from me, from you." He gestured to the cluster of microphones. The reporters surged forward, cameras flashing. Halverson hesitated, his mouth dry, then stepped forward. His voice shook as he spoke. "North Star Airlines apologizes unreservedly to Mr. Adrian Cole and to every passenger who witnessed the unacceptable events of this flight. What occurred was a failure of our values, a violation of basic human dignity, and it will not be tolerated, effective immediately. The staff involved are suspended. We are establishing the Cole Foundation for Equity in Aviation with an initial $50 million commitment, and we will begin comprehensive reforms today." The crowd exploded in noise. Shouts of questions, gasps of disbelief, cheers from a few passengers who felt vindicated. Adrian remained still, his expression calm, but his eyes were sharp. This was no victory lap. This was accountability. He stepped forward once more, his voice carrying above the din. "Let this be clear, not just to North Star, but to every company watching. Dignity is not negotiable. Respect is not optional. When you strip people of their humanity, you strip your own future. Tonight, North Star Airlines learned that lesson the hard way. May it serve as a warning." The silence that followed was profound. Even the cameras seemed to pause, as though reluctant to intrude on the gravity of his words. Adrian turned then, walking calmly through the crowd. The path cleared for him as if by instinct, passengers and reporters stepping aside. Marcus Ellison fell into stride beside him, notebook tucked under his arm. Lena Brooks, tears in her eyes, whispered into her phone, "This is the moment. This is history." Behind them, Halverson slumped, his shoulders heavy, his executives whispering frantically. Lauren sat hunched in a corner chair, her uniform disheveled, her career in ashes. Hannah stood near her, silent, shaken, but with the faintest glimmer of resolve in her eyes. Adrian exited the terminal into the bright morning light. Cameras still followed, but he no longer looked back. His father's watch ticked steadily on his wrist, the second hand sweeping forward. Time, always moving forward. He had endured. He had acted. And now, he had changed not just the course of one airline, but perhaps the course of an entire industry. The world would not forget what happened at 38,000 feet, and neither would he. And so, from humiliation in the cabin to justice in the terminal, the story of Adrian Cole reminds us of something deeper than corporate battles or viral headlines. It reminds us that dignity cannot be taken away by uniforms or titles. It is a birthright. It reminds us that silence can be broken, that one man's calm defiance can expose a system's ugliness, and that change often begins in the most unexpected places, even on an airplane. For those who witnessed this moment, both on board and across the world, it was more than a scandal. It was a mirror held up to society, asking us to confront the prejudice that still lingers in our skies, in our companies, in our everyday lives. Adrian Cole used his power not for revenge, but for reform, ensuring no passenger would suffer the same indignity again. Let this story linger in your heart, a call for respect, for accountability, for love stronger than hate. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, because together, we'll keep telling the stories that challenge, inspire, and demand a better world.